Hello everyone and welcome to Python week number 5 by Akshat. So let's get into it. So what's our agenda for today? First we're going to learn about a better way to get input from the user. Then we're going to learn about what are functions, and at the end we're going to learn about more libraries that we can utilize in our code. So let's get into it. The first thing we're going to learn today is how we can improve our method of getting input from users. As you might have realized, hopefully, is that there's a big flaw in the way that we've been getting the method so far. The code crashes if we get an input that isn't expected. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say we typecast our input as an integer. However, if the user types in a string such as hello and the code tries to turn that into an integer, it obviously crashes. This is a big issue. However, a very simple fix can solve it. So what we do is use a try and accept statement. So basically, it tries to take an input from the user, and if it fails, it can just run a certain piece of code, such as print an exception occurred, or else it can continue to what it was doing before. So that's how this would work. Now let's put this into the test. So using loops, we are going to again make a program that can tell the user whether a number is prime or composite. However, the twist this time is that we're going to ask the user the input with this new method. It's important to understand that we're basically doing the same thing as we always were. However, this time we're just being more secure about it. So let's get into it. Alright, so as you can see here, we have our code to determine whether a number is prime or composite. Now what we have to do is basically use a try and accept statement to get our input. So the first thing we have to do is type out try. Then we have to indent our number to indicate that it's going to be inside of our try statement. Finally, we have to add our accept, and we're just going to print an error statement such as error occurred. Perfect. And now let's run our code. 1 second. Alright, now let's run our code. So enter number, let's say str. As you can see, we're still getting an error. It's saying number is not defined. Because the reason is that our code is still running whether or not the try statement fails or succeeds. As a result, we have to put all of this code inside of our try, so it would only run whenever the try statement succeeds. So it'd be like this. Now what we have to do is basically indent the code to indicate that it's inside of the try, and now let's run it. As you can see, let's do str and enter. As you can see, we get error occurred. Now let's say we do 38. As you can see, 1 second. Seems like there is an issue with the code. As you can see, we have an issue as we're putting our I inside of the if statement. It should be outside as it's incrementing after every iteration, whether or not it meets a condition. So now let's run it. Enter number. And well, it would basically work is a general point of view. So that's how you would do this. Now we're going to learn about functions. So what are functions? A function is basically a block of code which only runs when it is called. You can also pass data into this function known as parameters. Where would you put the data of the name of these parameters? Well, you would put it inside of these parentheses. A function basically completes a task for a much greater solution, and it can also return data as a result, which can be stored in other variables in other functions that you might call it in. So let's look at the syntax that we have for a function. So first we do the def, meaning we're defining a function, then the name, in this case my underscore function, parentheses, colon, and then all the code that's going to be inside of this function has to be indented. Now let's look at some more keynotes about functions. So the parentheses that follow the name of functions are where the parameters are put, as I was saying, and we can use code in other functions to access their data. We also indent any code to indicate it's part of the function, as it's similar to conditional statements and loops as well. At the end of a function, we use a return statement for a variable, and this variable can now be accessed wherever we call the function. So let's look at some more syntax. When we use functions, we need to call them somewhere, or else they'll never be utilized. This is where the function def main comes. Of course, you can have any other names, but in this case, we prefer having it as def main. So Python is a programming language which reads all the data from top to bottom, but it needs a clue on what to run. So this clue is given based on this conditional statement, which is if underscore name underscore so on, and then if it meets that condition, it'll call the main function. As you can see, we use the name main and then parentheses. So let's do some practice. Let's repeat one of our former practice assignments using functions. Alright, so I'm just going to repeat the one that we were previously doing and add on to it. So the first step would be to add a main function. So let's do that. So I do def main. Actually, my bad. My apologies. The def main should be outside of the try statement. 1 second. So let's fix that. Perfect. And then we do def main. Alright, and then don't forget your conditional statement at the bottom. And there's no need to really memorize this conditional statement, just make sure that it's there. And yeah. Alright, so as you can see, we have quite a bit of code here, and this seems like the perfect opportunity for us to make a new function, such as def prime. And we'll take a parameter as 1 second. Let's fix the indentation issues of this code first. So that fixed. Alrighty, almost done. Alrighty, now our code is ready to go. However, we need to provide some parameters such as number. So we'll do number right here. As you can see, we have number, and then we have to call this function somewhere. Where would we call it? We'd probably call it in our main function. So let's do that. So we would use the name prime, and then we have to give a parameter of number. So in which variable is the variable number being stored? In the main function. Well, if we look, we're getting an input from the user and storing it inside of a variable called number. So let's just give that as a parameter. So let's write number, and then now let's run it. Alright, enter number. Let's do str. An error occurred. Now let's do 25, let's say. And as you can see, composite. So basically, functions don't affect your code in any way in terms of how it runs. However, it can make your code much more organized and divide it into little segments and make it much more easier to understand. Alright, now let's take another example of some other libraries. So the first step in importing the library is this line, import random. Random is basically the name of the library, and we're basically importing it so that we can use it in our code. Now what the random library basically does is it can give us a random integer, random string, and in this case we're going to talk about how it can give us a random integer. So we have to use a syntax of random, which refers back to the random library, and then we're going to call a specific function in the random library, which is randint, which basically gives us a random integer. However, we have to give it two parameters. These two parameters are going to be the beginning range and the end range, basically meaning that the integer that it returns back to us is going to be between 3 and 9. So now let's implement this. So let's use the random library and get a random number between 0 and 100. Then we're going to determine whether that number is prime or composite. So let's get started. Alright, so now we already have our code to determine whether a number is prime or not. The only thing we have to change is using our random library to get our number. So we would do first random. Actually, first we have to import the library random, so let's do that. Import random. Okay. Then we have to do random.randint, and the range would be from 0 to 100. Perfect. Now what we have to do is call the function prime, and the parameter that we're going to give it is the variable number. And all the code is running as it should. However, we're going to make it a bit more easier for us to understand by making the final print statement a formatted string. So what we're going to print is number is prime. As a result, if the number, let's say, is 77, it'll print 77 is composite, you know? So let's get that done. Number is composite. All right, now let's test this out. 19 is prime. All right, 27 is composite. 27 is composite. 88 is composite. 95 is composite. 16 is composite. As you can see, this works, and it's giving us random numbers and working as it should. Perfect. For the final assignment for today, we're going to do an assignment where we accept a parameter for the function, which is storing a list, and sort it from least to greatest. So pause the video right now and try to brainstorm some ideas of how we could solve this. Alright, so we already have our 5 integers being stored inside of our variable called list. As you can see, we run a for loop getting 5 inputs from the user, which we later store inside the list variable called list. Then we have to send this over to our order function. However, a thing about the order function is that it expects a parameter. This parameter is called list, and it expects that we return a list through it. So we have to look back at our main function and think, okay, so what items in our list, what variables in our list are lists, right? So if we look around, we can notice that the variable named list is a list, and we provide that as our parameter. Now, how do we loop through our list? Well, we probably have to use a while loop to loop through each and every index, which would be while I is less than length of list. And you probably saw the syntax in my previous video where we can basically get the the length of a list by using this inbuilt Python library. So the first thing we have to do for all while loops is have an increment feature in the with every iteration. My bad. Alright, so the thing about this situation is that we're probably going to need a nested loop. Now, what is a nested loop? A nested loop is when we increment, when we put a while loop inside of a while loop. So what this would look like is we probably have another variable, let's say f, and we say f is less than length of list. This would result in f also looping through each and every list item, and we can compare the list at index f, the value that's there, and compare that to list at index I. And based on which one is greater, we'll organize our list in that manner. So this comparison requires for a conditional statement. So we'd probably say if list of I is less than list of f, what we probably have to do is swap the 2 items. So how would we swap the 2 items? Well, we probably want to store our list of f into some third-party variable such as list item, and then we'll say list of f is equal to list at index I. Perfect. And then list of I would equal the original value of list of f, which we stored inside of list item. So let's see if this works. Actually, it would not work, because remember, we have a while loop. However, I forgot to increment my f value in the inner while loop. So now I fixed that issue. Now let's see if it works. So let's say 56, 34, 73, and then 12, and finally 8. Well, nothing printed out. Why is that? Well, we never have any print statement in this. So let's do, after the while loop is done, we'll do a print list. Now let's see what happens. 56, 34, 12, 78, and 9. As you can see, it's from least to greatest. 9, 12, 34, 56, and finally 78. If you guys still have some confusions, try to understand this code much more deeper, as it could be a bit tricky. And if you guys have any other questions, make sure to leave them down in the comment sections and I'll be happy to answer them. See you guys in the next one.